Hey, what's going on everyone? Adam with Bishop Sheen Rosaries here today, and I've got a video on a topic, a question that people have asked me a few times, and I wanted to address: can you pray the Rosary well at Mass? So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about what active participation in the Mass means. Stick around. This is a very important video. The first thing I want to address is that praying the Rosary should actually increase your desire for active participation in the Mass. This is one of the fruits of the Luminous Mysteries, actually the last Luminous Mystery, the institution of the Eucharist. The fruit of that mystery is active participation in the Mass and adoration for the Holy Eucharist. Maybe you've heard the Mass is the highest form of prayer in our church, and that's 100% correct. The Mass is so important, and the Mass is the time that we get to experience full communion with our Lord Jesus Christ. So it does make sense that we should be active participants and we should be focused. And a lot of times during the Mass, when I do pray the Rosary, so here's a little hint, I do it sometimes, is that I pray for focus, for centering, to really understand and comprehend the mystery that is happening and unfolding before my very eyes. But should you be completely checked out of all responses in the Mass outside of your own Rosary? And to that I would say no. If we look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church and some of the Vatican II documents, we can actually see a case for being an active participant and why you should be responding to what the priest says. Now, in Sacrosanctum Concilium, and forgive my pronunciation, one of the main documents that came out of Vatican II, written by Pope Paul VI, we read this point: "The Church, therefore, earnestly desires that Christ's faithful, which present at the mystery of faith, should not be there as strangers or silent spectators. On the contrary, through a good understanding of the rites and prayers, they should take part in the sacred actions, conscious of what they are doing, with devotion and full collaboration." So there's a couple things I want to point out here. Pope Paul VI does make it very clear that we are not spectators, right? We are called to be active participants. We are called to be engaged. He mentions that we should have some form of understanding of the prayers and the rites. He asks for full collaboration. Now, it's important to remember that we, as the congregation, do not make the Mass happen. We are merely participants. We're not spectators, but we also aren't the ones driving the Mass forward. We don't have the powers to change bread and wine into the body and blood, soul and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. Perhaps first we should define what is active participation, and the first Pope to actually define it was Pope Pius X, back in the early 1900s, and he talked about how it was both an interior and an exterior disposition. So active participation in the Mass means, yes, saying the exterior responses to the priest, singing, listening to the homily, and making the gestures, the sign of the cross, kneeling, standing, whatever it might be. But it's also interior. It's putting yourself in the position of being ready to receive the sacred mysteries of the Mass. And this is something that I believe the Rosary actually helps me achieve, this interior disposition. So I come from the point of view that the Rosary can be a tool to help refocus and recenter, right? It shouldn't be the only thing that you're doing at Mass. But there are a lot of stretches of the Mass, I think about 3 to 4, depending on if you're at a Novus Ordo Mass or a traditional Latin Mass, in which there are stretches of time, maybe long enough to say an entire decade of the Rosary, if not multiple decades of the Rosary, without needing to say any physical words. I do think there is a place to pray the Rosary during the Mass, and that is when you are noticing that you are trailing off, that you are not focused, that you know that you aren't going to have to be participating actively in one of the points where the congregation does respond, and you know those responses. You should be trying to be an active member of the congregation in those times. But it can be a tool to aid us to get back on the path when our brain does start to wander. And I would be lying if I said that does not happen quite frequently to me, where my brain wanders off. And I would rather have Mother Mary pulling me back in with the Rosary, pulling me back towards her Son and saying, here's where we are right now. This is why we're at Mass, for him, for his sacrifice that he made for you. And this is the beauty of the Rosary during the Mass. It's not I guess, the first thing that I'm focusing on, but it's something to help me come back to the mystery at hand. A lot of times I will specifically be praying for focus or to cut out distraction in my mind so that I can have a more fruitful, more holy Mass for myself. Now, I will say that in the traditional Latin Mass, it's a lot easier to pray the Rosary during Mass than, say, the Novus Ordo, especially the low version, the low Mass of the traditional Latin Mass. And this is just happens to be that there's a lot more silences. The priest is faced away from you, and a lot of times he will say many parts, especially of the Eucharistic prayer, under his breath. The stretches can be as long as 10 to 15 minutes, and that's a long time to just be, I guess, sitting. And in history, there were a higher percentage of churchgoers that would pray the Rosary at that time. Now, a Novus Ordo Mass, or the Mass that a lot of us are probably familiar with post-Vatican II, is a lot choppier, or seems a lot more segmented to try to pray that Rosary during, which is not a problem. It's just that you're oftentimes breaking it up, doing a decade here, a decade there, and that's not a problem. And if this is the only time during the day that you're gonna find time to pray the Rosary, obviously it's better that you pray it than that you don't. The worst Rosary that you could pray is the one that you don't pray at all. So remember that, and if it is a good time for you to focus your mind, then I do recommend praying the Rosary at Mass. Now, should you be praying it out loud? No. I would say you want to be, at this time, praying it to yourself. You don't want to be distracting other people. And this is also one disadvantage of praying the Rosary at Mass, is that you're praying it in silence. And I personally like to hear the words to make it even more sensory of a prayer. These are all things to consider. I'm not saying you have to go out and start praying the Rosary during Mass, but if you would like to, it is something that is not, I guess, wrong to do. It shouldn't be discouraged. So let me know in the comments if this was helpful for you in answering your questions. Thank you all for staying to the end of the video. I hope you like our content, and if you want to buy a rosary for yourself, check out sheenrosaries.com, and always support us here by liking and subscribing to our videos. From us to you, through Mary.